Like, I'd like to welcome all of you in this wonderful morning for a beautiful topic that we have from our very own Professor Marcus Byrne from School of Apes. So I'd like to call on just to come into the visual speaker and just to give us a brief CV of who he is. Thanks.
Hello. I'd like to start off by thanking Kenny and the Eco Group for keeping me involved in their activities. I really appreciate that. Marcus Byrne is an associate professor at Wits, where he teaches zoology. He achieved his BSc honours in London and his PhD at Wits and received many accolades in his academic career. Some of which are, in 1998 he was awarded the C.J. van der Horst Prize for outstanding postgraduate research. In 2006 he received the Vice Chancellor's Award for Academic Citizenship. He has published many papers in both national and international accredited journals and has presented numerous papers and posters at national and international conferences. Too numerous to mention here due to time constraints. Marcus has been involved in collaborative research with local and international universities. He has been a member of research projects and is the reviewer of commissions and scientific journals. One of the research projects he has done is extensive work on biological control of invasive alien plants and weeds through the use of insects, which is the topic of the talk today. Ironically, I had my first encounter with Marcus when my department removed alien trees on campus, and I'm sure he'll expand on that during his talk. Please put your hands together for a warm welcome for Professor Marcus Byrne.
Thanks, Andres and Kenny, and as Andres has pointed out, we've had a long association, and I've actually been trying to defend the weeds a bit, so I've actually forgotten about that these guys cut them down, and I use them as a teaching tool, so we're in a tense relationship with each other. But anyway, today is a celebration, because what I'm going to talk to you about is something that South Africa is very good at, and something that we should be very proud of, and what I want you to leave the room feeling is that we're doing something good, and you are going to be a promoter of this science. So that's your objective this morning, is to get this stuff on board and become ambassadors for this science in South Africa. So if you have a look at the logo that's on the wall there, can you identify the plants? What's this plant here? This one? Cactus, yeah. And then this one? Water hyacinth, and it's got a little weevil that we use as a biocontrol agent. I like weevils because they've got big noses. Funny that, isn't it? And then this plant here? Pom-pom. And this animal here, does anyone know what this thing is? It's a thrip. So it's an insect that, if any of you are gardeners, you will know them as pests often. We're going to be the first people in the world ever to release a thrip as a biocontrol agent. And we're going to get it right. And we're going to control, hopefully, this plant with this little insect here. So that's the sort of science that I'm going to talk about today. So the weeds I'm talking about are not these types of weeds. In the classroom, it's these types of weeds. So this is a picture I took in Natal outside Howick in 2004. And as you can see, it's wall-to-wall weeds. The way I describe Howick is as weed central. It is, if you stick anything in the ground in Howick, it will grow. Do you recognise any of the plants here? Morning glory, yeah. And you can see why weeds are so devastating, because they climb into any habitat and they take over and they shade out the indigenous plants and they compete for all sorts of resources like water and nutrients and light. And I want you to be critical of the talk that I'm going to give you this morning, because I'll do a sales job on you. And everything I tell you is true, but you need to be critical because it's not a straightforward issue. These plants are actually contributing to the biodiversity of this area. Is that a good thing? I don't think so. But nevertheless, don't let me convince you just because I can shout louder and I've got a microphone. Okay, so here's an alien plant. What's that? Should we worry about it? Why not? It doesn't spread. So it's an alien plant. It originates mainly in Asia, some in Europe, some in America. So roses are very beautiful plants. They're all over the world. But they don't move themselves around and invade natural areas on their own. And that's a critical issue that we're looking at with these plants. What about this one? Recognize that? Water hyacinth. This is a beast. It's a very beautiful plant, but it's an absolute monster of a thing because it will spread itself through any environment on its own, and it will devastate that environment and have a massive impact. Okay, what about this one? Prickly pear. Where's it from? South America. I gave this talk the other day, and the VC said it was from the Eastern Cape. I'm not sure whether that was a joke, but a lot of people think that this is an indigenous plant. People think that this is an African plant. And in fact, there are no native cactaceae in the whole of Africa. We can argue about that. There is one, and there's a botanist sitting at the end of the table there waving his finger at me. There is one species, as far as I'm aware, is in the cactaceae, but basically there are no cacti in the whole of Africa. So this is a very, very foreign plant. But this is where our story starts in terms of the history of biocontrol in South Africa. And the history story starts with these guys. My ancestors in their beautiful red coats, colonising the world in the 16th and 17th century, and wearing these brilliant red coats to intimidate the opposition, and also so they could see each other in the gun smoke of a battle. And the dye that was used to create this red colour actually comes from an insect. And it comes from a little insect called cochineal. And if you've eaten a red food recently, what's that cake that everybody eats at the moment, red velvet, or chewing gum, or cochineal is used as a red food dye. So you've eaten an insect product, whether you like it or not. And it's also used to create a dye, and what the Indians have done in South America for millennia is to scrape these insects off this plant and then generate the dye from that. So, the British were having a bit of a problem. They had a massive outbreak of prickly pear in one of their colonies in the Punjab, and they were having difficulty in getting cochineal to dye their red coats in South America, from South America, because obviously South America was a Portuguese and Spanish colony. So the British decided what they would do is that they would transfer the insect from South America onto the prickly pear that they had growing in India, where it wasn't native, and in that way generate their own cochineal industry. Brilliant. So that was the plan. Put the insect onto the plant and then basically create an industry in India. That was the result. They messed it up. They got the wrong insect onto the wrong plant. And this was the result. The insects killed the plants. Now that could seem like a trivial result, but this chap here, called C.P. Lounsbury, a South African entomologist, heard about this and decided this would be a really good way to solve a problem that was in South Africa at the time. And the problem was prickly pear. And this chap in his pyjamas, looking extremely miserable in the Eastern Cape, epitomizes what sort of problem there was in the Eastern Cape in terms of prickly pear. I mean, it literally is wall-to-wall prickly pear, and it was threatening people's livelihoods. It was overtaking grazing land, and animals were getting trapped in it, and effectively it was destroying huge areas of the country. So C.P. Lansbury in 1913, so this is our anniversary now, introduced this insect, and this is the result. So here's a picture from the 1930s, and I really like this picture because you can date the car. The car looks like a sort of old Daimler or something. And then over here, this looks like a Chevy Impala or something like that. But look at the hillside at the base of it. Prickly pear, no prickly pear. And that is very dramatic, but there's two things to notice. One is the dates, 1930, so that's a long time after 1930. And then 1970, it's a long time after 1930. So this process takes a long time, and the results are not always as schematic as in that photograph. But anyway, here's the sales job. So here's another success. This is a project that we were involved in at Wits, very successful. That is a barbel sitting on top of a water body. So that weed has filled the whole dam to such an extent that that fish couldn't get any oxygen. It's come to the surface of the water to air breathe, because they can air breathe. It's broken out onto the surface to get air, and then it couldn't get back into the water because the weed was so thick. This weed also comes from South America, and what we did was go to South America and look for an agent, an insect that would eat that weed, and there's a little insect sitting on the top of the head of a match. In fact, there are two insects sitting there. The boy is sitting on top of the girl. That's the way it goes with insects. They're not actually mating. It's called mate guarding. If you've ever had a fella holding your hand for 45 minutes and you're thinking, what's going on here? He's mate guarding. He's making sure that nobody else can get near you, even though he's not monopolising you at that point. So that's a bit of hand-holding for insects. This is the official press release photo of the event. The press turned up with cameras with lenses like this to take photos, and they were massively disappointed when they realised that the agent was this size. So that was the photo. And this was the effect. That's a before, that's after. And that's literally 6 months between the two dates. This is a very, very, very effective science when we get it right. This is another example of a water weed, also from South America, water lettuce. And if you've been to the Kruger Park and you've been to Sunset Dam and you've seen the hippos wearing little hats made of water lettuce, well, that's the weed. There's the insect on the end of the person's finger that we released against it, and that's the result at the end. Very, very dramatic. Now, this is where you have to be skeptical, because I'm doing a sales job on you, and water is a very good place to show the effects of biocontrol, because it either is or it isn't covered. But if you think about vegetation in the bush, it's much harder to tell whether the weeds have been removed or not. Okay, so what I'm describing to you is a process called classical biological control. And what it involves is going to the country of origin of the pest weed, and then looking for a natural enemy, in this case the weevil, and bringing that into the country of introduction, South Africa in this case. So the weed has got here on its own. I'll tell you who brought the weed in a few minutes. We've gone back and we said, okay, what eats that weed, and can we introduce it, and what effect will it have? So the important point to remember here is that we never eliminate the weeds, and those photographs I've showed you make it look as if the weed has gone away. In fact, this is what's happening. So here's time on the bottom axis here, here's the population size of either the weed or the pest, and there's the pest cruising along having a great time. We introduce the agent, so this could be the weevil, its population climbs, and then it causes a decline in the target. And then eventually they reach what we call a new equilibrium. So we never eliminate these things, and that's a really important concept to get into your head, because as humans, We tend to think that the kitchen must be swept clean, all the plates must be stacked, everything must be sorted out nicely. That is not going to happen. All we're going to do is reduce these weeds to what we would call a naturalized part of the ecosystem. And that's a very, very important starting point in this process. So what we're doing is turning these chaps, so he's a Viking, and he struck fear into the hearts of my ancestors in the UK and Ireland in the sort of 10th and 11th century, as they came up the rivers. And what we're doing is turning them into this, a much more benign part of the ecosystem. They're still there, but we're able to tolerate them and cope with them. So, how have we done so far in South Africa? And I think this is important data because, as I keep telling you, I'm doing a sales job on you. Look here, it's not bad. So, complete control. That means we don't have to interfere with any pesticides or mechanical removal. These plants, such as azolla, the weed I showed you, prickly pear, we would consider to be under complete control. Then substantial control is probably things like water hyacinth, and that's where most of the weeds sit. And then, unfortunately, some of the organisms that we've tried to control, we've either actually got virtually none, or even worse, we don't know. And I think that's an important part of this science, is that there aren't enough of us. There aren't enough scientists, there isn't enough money in the system to make sure that we can actually follow up on all of the work that we've done. And so this unknown part is what we would call post-release evaluation. So we release the insects, and then we just leave them to get on with it. And that's a gap in our science at the moment. Okay, what could go wrong? It's your turn.
If the equipment is not finished and the biocontrol agent kills all the ticks, what happens then? Does it mutate and start?
Okay, brilliant. So if you didn't hear what was said, if the new equilibrium is not reached, if the biocontrol agent either kills its target weed completely, and then itself mutates into some sort of other organism and basically attacks indigenous plants. So that's the big fear and the big threat with this type of science. And the short answer is that doesn't happen. And the reason it doesn't happen is because we do the science very carefully. It takes about 3 years to develop the insect and to make sure in these sorts of tests, in this sort of environment, that it cannot eat anything else. And the basic principle behind it is that insects in general, as herbivores, tend to be tied very closely to their food source. And I'm going to have to do a little act here, so I'll take this away. So what you've got to think about is that the insect can only attack that plant. And we have to test that in the laboratory. Now, people do always say, but what if it mutates? Well, let's think of a mutation that could act as an analogy for this. Okay, so I've evolved into a corner here to live on a certain type of plant. You're asking me to evolve back out of this corner and now come over here and evolve to eat this plant here. Now, it's a bit like having a tail. You're all sitting on the remnants of your tail. Have you noticed it this morning? How's your tail this morning? Okay. I wouldn't mind a tail, actually, because I could hold my cell phone as I was riding my bicycle. You could use another hand, couldn't you? Wouldn't be a bad idea. So here I am, I've got no tail. I need to evolve back out of here and evolve a tail. Now, what am I going to do with half a tail? If I've got a whole tail over here, that's great. But if I'm evolving out here, because I'm not going to arise with a whole tail immediately. So now I've got half a tail. Sure. Do you think I'm going to get mated? When somebody looks around the back and says, what's that thing there? So there is no way that the insect can mutate and evolve to live on another plant. If we've chosen one that's trapped in this evolutionary corner here, it cannot come out of that corner and perform equally well on two different plants. And that's the key issue. And this is what we do in the laboratory. Okay, so we run all sorts of host specificity tests, and we test all sorts of indigenous plants, and we give them two types of tests. The first thing is we give them no choice tests. And so this example here is a little insect that we don't want to eat spinach, but this is a very silly example, but nevertheless, you put them in a cage and you feed them spinach, or you feed them lettuce, or you feed them potatoes, or you feed them acacias, and you ask that insect a question: will you eat this? And as my friend often says, if you were in a room with a telegraph pole and that was all you had to eat, you would try and eat it, wouldn't you? So even if the insects do eat the non-target plant in this situation, then we give them another test. And in this case, we give them a choice between what we consider a non-target, and in this case, what we would consider the target plant. So we look at the data from both of these types of tests, and we balance the results. If we get attack on the plant in this situation, that's okay, because we still give it a choice test. If it attacks the non-target plant in this situation, we will probably reject it. And that is the point at which we make this decision that ensures the safety of our indigenous plants. So, the problem is, there are about 19,000 indigenous plants in this country. That's a lot of plants to test. So we actually don't have time to go through them all. So we have a selective process where we start at the middle, there's our target plant, and we work in our choice tests from the same genus, the same family, the same ecotype, and some economic value plants. So we're very careful about the way we do this, and so far in this country we have never made a mistake. So we are very proud of our safety record in this country in terms of introducing insects. And to give you an example of how good we are at this, and there's no harm in boasting if you're good at something, is looking at black wattle. So here you've got a natural drainage line with a little natural forest patch, and that yellow V around the edge of it is black wattle. Black wattle from Australia. Oh. Okay, so black wattle is a beast. The problem is it's also a crop, because it's used as a timber, it's used for charcoal, it's used for paper. It's what we would call a conflict of interest species. So there's a whole group of people in this country that do not want to see black wattle eliminated, and whereas a lot of the rest of us do, because it uses water and because it invades the habitat. So how do we deal with that? Well, what we decided to do is to attack these things. These are the reproductive structures of the plant. Black wattle produces seed pods like it's going out of fashion. This thing can produce 20,000 seeds per square metre. Those seeds stay in the ground for up to 20 years, so it has a 20-year seed bank. This thing is a beast. If you clear it, you're going to have to clear it for 20 years, and if you have a single seed that goes into the ground in that time, it's going to sit there for another 20 years. So this is a very, very useful target to attack. And the way we've attacked it is with these two insects. This beautiful little midge here galls the flowers, so it attacks the reproductive structure. Another weevil with a nice big long nose attacks the seeds. So what we've got are two insects that effectively castrate the plant. We cut off its goodies, we cut off its reproductive structures, and we stop it producing babies into the environment. And so we can target not just the plant, but we can target a specific structure on that plant, which I think is a very, very clever part of the science. So these are the flowers. There isn't a single flower there. Every single one of them has been galled by the midge. And then any of the flowers that do get through, instead of producing a beautiful seed pod like this, all the seeds will be damaged by the weevil. So by and large, we're able to take out over 90% of those seeds. So the next question then is who pays for all this? Where does the money come from? And because it's such a massive enterprise and nobody is going to make a commercial living out of selling biocontrol agents that go into the general environment. It's the government that pays. And in particular, it's the Department of Environmental Affairs, which has a massive budget of over 4 billion, but they devote about 1 billion of that to weed control. So it's a substantial amount of money that goes into this. Biocontrol only gets about 1% of that, so we get a tiny proportion of that whole billion, but that's okay. The reason the government spends so much money on it is because the alien weeds drink around about 3.5% of our mean annual runoff. So 3.5% of the water that you washed in this morning, hopefully, that you drank, we're drinking now, 3.5% of that water is disappearing down the throat of alien invasive plants. And if we left it there, if we left those plants in place, we would have to build another massive dam. A massive dam is a huge capital expense to the government. And the government has made a decision: we either build more dams or we start taking out the aliens. And that is the second choice. Is what they've done is they've decided to take out the alien plants. And I think that is a fantastic decision, because what they've decided to do is to use it as a social upliftment program. And if you don't know about working for water, you should. It's something that as South Africans we should be incredibly proud of. There is not a single program like this anywhere else on the planet. And I tell people, next time you get on a bus, you get on an aeroplane, you go overseas, you say to the person sitting on the seat next to you, do you know about working for water? No, can I tell you about working for water? And then you boast about it. We are the best at this in the world. What happens, working for water moves into an area, they employ people, they say, okay, I'll train you to use a chainsaw, you can use a herbicide, you can drive the bucky, you get a contract for 2 years, and it lifts that community. It puts money into the community, it puts skills into the community. And the community takes out the weeds, and everybody benefits. But at the same time, we need the biocontrol agents to back up, to get in there, to take the seeds out, to stop the seeds being produced in the first place. And so in the long term, biocontrol is utterly essential. So if you look at the bottom line, look at the cost-benefit ratio. For every rand spent on jointed cactus, we've saved 1,154 rand. Even our worst plant here, Lantana, for every rand spent, we've saved 34 rand. And our best one on this data here is for every rand spent, we've saved 4,500 rand pretty much. It is an extremely cost-effective system. Once it's in place, it stays in place and it works forever. Okay, so there's the sales job. What about Lantana? It's not one of our successes, but it's an ongoing problem, and I'll explain why and what we're doing about it. Lantana originates from Central America. It was taken to Kew Gardens by the British. The British were an awful lot, really, weren't they? Yeah. I'm actually Irish. I blow with the wind. I can change sides very easily. So from Kew Gardens, they developed over 250 varieties. So Lantana is not a natural plant. Lantana is a hybrid of note. Look at the colour varieties just in that diagram there. From Kew, they spread it all over their colonies. They spread it all over the world. Wasn't that generous of them? And now we have this beautiful plant invading our indigenous areas. We've released 22 biocontrol agents against this plant, and it is still a problem. It's not as bad as it would have been if we hadn't, but we are still battling with this plant, largely because of its hybrid vigour and its hybrid variety, because the different colours behave differently, and the different insects deal with the different colour varieties differently. However, we have one hero in the bag at the moment. It's just been released a few years ago. It's a tiny little mite. So that's a 10/1000th of a millimetre, that scale over there. So you can imagine how tiny this animal is. It's an electron microscopic picture of the animal here. It's really tiny. What it does is it galls the flowers. And so that's our great hope there. So Lantana's not solved, but we haven't left it. What about water hyacinth? I've used that as an example. A beautiful plant that reproduces asexually. So it not only produces seeds, the seeds are produced around about, I think, 4,000 seeds per plant. They also have a 10 years seed bank life in the silt, and it can also reproduce asexually. That's what the Vaal River looks like, or looked like in the 1980s. 22 kilometers of water hyacinth as a single plug. It's not as bad now. We have released a variety of agents against it. There are 6 agents shown on this diagram here. There are actually now 7 agents out in the system. And we are winning in certain places at certain times of the year. So that's a before and after photo of New Year's down in the Eastern Cape. The weed is still there. It's still in the environment. It's at its new equilibrium, but we can, if we work hard at it, do the job properly and have an effect. If you look at this diagram here, this is the number of species of water hyacinth biocontrol agents out. And this is when we still had 6 agents. If you look at those dots, there isn't a single dot that has the number 6 on it. So in 2009, there wasn't a single site in the country where we had released all the agents. We need to do that. On average, we only have about 3 agents per site. So we as biocontrollers and as scientists and as the general public need to get involved in moving these agents around the country. The other thing that we need to work on is the effort that we put into releasing these things. This is a siphon dam down in Natal, chock-a-block with water hyacinth. It had agents on it, and then the local insect rearing people decided, okay, let's see what we can do if we pump insects into this system. And so what they did is they put in crates of plants. Can you imagine turning up to a water hyacinth infestation and people see you putting more water hyacinth into the system? Luckily, nobody threw them in the water. They just convinced them it was a good idea because the plants were infested with weevils. So they pumped insects into the system. You can see the plants have already gone brown, and by the next January, it was under control. The weed's still there, it's at its new equilibrium, but if we pump insects into systems, we can make this work. The other problem with water hyacinth is that our waterways are eutrophic. They are full of nutrients. So it's not just the plant. You and I and our local sewage systems and our local councils are responsible for pouring nutrients into these systems. And you and I as general public can keep an eye on this sort of thing and complain to the council when there are sewage spills. The other thing about water hyacinth is that if you take out the weed, you take out the agents. And often you have to clear, you have to use herbicides on these systems. And so what we've done here at WITS is develop a system where we suggested that only the centre of the infestation is sprayed. You leave the edge of the infestation intact, so you leave the plants there. Don't sweep the kitchen clean. And those plants remain as a refuge for the biocontrol agents. And then as the main centre of the plants die, then the insects can move off those plants and onto the refuge at the side and then control it. So what we need to do as biocontrollers is we need to get agents onto the sites. We need to talk to the landowners and we need to talk to the property owners. What do they find acceptable? You're never going to get rid of these plants, but you have to think about what level of infestation you find acceptable. Use herbicides if necessary, but keep refuges for the insects. And in a water system, we have to reduce the nutrients in those systems. So, what can you do as general public to get involved in this sort of thing? Well, first is to think about where our aliens come from. They come from South America and they come from Australia. Why do you think that is?
Similar climate.
Sorry?
Similar climate.
The climate. We sit at the same latitude. And we've also been colonised by the same people. The Brits, the villains of the story, colonised South Africa and they colonised Australia. Okay, South America was Spanish and Portuguese colony, but the British traded very heavily with the South Americans, particularly during the Boer War, and a lot of weeds were brought over during the Boer War at that stage. The other thing is, how do alien plants get here? How do they move around the world? It's your mum. Well, you. My mum used to go to people's gardens and take a cutting. She'd take a slip. I'll just take a slip of that, and it would go in the handbag, and then off she'd go and stick it in the garden at home. That's great, except if she gets on a plane from South America and goes to Coventry or wherever she's living, and sticks it in the ground there. We move plants and stuff around the world with us, and we have to be conscious of what we are doing. If you go to Australia, they will strip search you on the way in to make sure you're not bringing any seeds, but they will sell you seeds at Australia Geographic as you leave the airport. They will sell you Australian seeds. You have to think about what you are moving around the world with you. And to return to our example here of a Zolla, just to illustrate the story, I said we knew who brought it in. It was a dentist. He lived in Colesberg in the 1940s. And if you look at that map there, you can see that he was a keen aquarist. He used to go to South America on his holidays and collect South American plants, and clearly managed to spread it around his locale in the 40 years between 1980 and 1940 and 1980. I wonder if he had a girlfriend over here and maybe had fun at the same time. He wooed them with ferns. And then look what happened between 1980 and 2002. The plant exploded. That's the other thing to take on board, is these plants sit in the ecosystem up to 100 years. Prickly pear sat in the South African ecosystem before it detonated. It exploded. Azolla did the same in the 1980s. Do not think because that weed sitting in your garden is looking innocuous that it's not doing anything. It is sitting there thinking about an invasion. Okay, the next thing you should think about is supporting working for water. We have a fantastic system, as I've said here, that the government has provided and has continued to support and will continue to support hopefully for another 10 or 20 years. It's something we should all be proud of. And then you can learn about alien invasive weeds. This, at the moment, is the Bible. It's a book by a lady called Leslie Henderson. And if you would like a copy of it, I can give you a CD, which what I'll do is I'll collect everybody's names, and I will provide you with a CD if you give me your address, and you can have a copy of this book. And in the book, it's very simple. It gives you a picture of the plant, it gives you the distribution, and it gives you the biocontrol agents and the history of the plant. It's worth having this book to know what's in the environment around us. And then the other thing is there are lots of websites. Again, the government runs websites, Working for Water, National Parks, Plant Protection, and also WITS has recently put up some stuff on weeds for National Environment Day. And from that WITS website, you'll be able to pick up information like this. Okay, you can't read it, but basically it's a list of experts around the country, different institutes, that will be able to help you with weed problems. So get conscious, get out there, and hopefully we will see this little guy doing his business over the next few years, and we as the general public will be aware of the great things that Biocontrol is doing in this country. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Prof. I'd like to open for the stage. Anyone who has a question at this point? Only 4 questions for now. I believe this is very educational, very informative. So I thought I'll get very few questions from the stage.
Sorry?
Areas with clear wattles,
In some areas where wattles are being cleared, they actually leave the saplings with long, lean stems. Is that done purposely for the trade that makes these shade covers, or is that just using own initiative?
Okay, the short answer is I haven't a clue. Because I've never been involved in a clearing exercise myself. But nevertheless, it brings up the topic of clearing. How does one do it? And there are many ways of doing it. And the principal thing is if it's a big thicket, a massive thicket, leave it. Take off the babies at the edge that are stepping out into the environment, getting further. Do what you can. The other thing is that people often do it, and this, what I was thinking about here, is that if you take out enough space to allow the indigenous plants to come back up, they will often then shade out the aliens. But I'm not sure with black wattle, because black wattle really is very vigorous. But there are many ways to skin the cat, and that's probably what's going on there.
The same question.
The thing I wanted to ask is, can you introduce these biological agents in the country to sort of control the plants used to manufacture drugs? So you can introduce biological species here, so in our country you won't be able to manufacture opioids because the agents kill the plants, I don't know.
Right. This is an interesting one as well. The short answer to that is I don't know, but I'll make it up as I go along. Firstly, marijuana. Is marijuana an indigenous plant? The botanist says no. So, okay, that's already, we can look at it as a potential target. It depends on its indigenous relatives, whether we'd be able to target it or not. And then the final point is that remember the new equilibrium. The new equilibrium is not elimination. Elimination is not possible with this system. And if you were to grow marijuana, and I believe people are happy to grow it inside their wardrobes with lights, and, so if you're prepared to go to those lengths, getting a little can of insecticide and just giving it a zick to get rid of the biocontrol agents would be so simple it would be trivial. So I think the short answer is you don't stand a chance of eliminating drug plants from the system using insects.
I just want to know if alien invasion is specific to South Africa, or do South America and Australia also suffer these?
Great question. Thanks, great question. So, you know, here I am boasting about how good South Africa is at this. We rank ourselves about third or fourth on the world system of who does biocontrol. The Americans are first because they've introduced more agents than anyone else. But in terms of their success and also their mistakes, we're doing better than they are. The Australians are exceptionally good at this science because they have a variety of advantages. It is a very clearly delimited continent. It is basically one group of people who's in charge of that whole continent, and they can control their borders very tightly. And they've had a massive mistake in the past with an organism called the cane toad. So if you want a story about the cane toad, we can tell you cane toad stories. So the Aussies are very conscious of making mistakes. And then we're third or fourth. South America has the same problem, Europe has the same problem, but it's interesting that Europeans have only just released their first biocontrol agent, so they're way behind us. But the problem is people move stuff around with them, and when you go home today, look at the people who are standing at the traffic lights. They've got nothing. Their backsides hanging out the trousers, and what are they doing? They're carrying stuff with them. Look in this room, you've got a bag. Again, humans carry stuff with us, and we carry our plants with us, and we spread them all over the world. So it's a universal problem.
Last question. Okay. I have one question. Out of our indigenous plants that we have in South Africa, do we have some kinds of plants that have been taken out, maybe in Australia, America, and that are classified as weeds that you know?
A South African indigenous plant. Oh yeah, so that answers the story. We give our weeds to Australia. So I can't think of the Latin name of it. It's called bone seed. Chrysanthemoides, thank you. You rescued me. So there's a very attractive marine coastal plant called Chrysanthemoides. In fact, there's some growing in the botanical garden up next to our building. It's a massive problem in Australia. Also, one of our asparagus ferns, it's called bridal creeper. Massive problem in Australia. So we swap these plants back and forth. We brought in Australian acacias to stabilise our dunes in the Cape when we have our own dune stabilising plants. We just do stupid things. There's an organisation called the CSIRO in Australia which we work with on biocontrol plants. There is another arm of the same organisation that does aid to Africa. And as part of their aid in Central Africa, in Kenya, they are bringing Australian acacias into Africa to use as fuel wood and firewood. And we've spoken to the guys in our branch and said, why is your organisation bringing weeds into Africa? And they say, well, we can't do anything about it. It's considered to be aid. So, yes, we share weeds in the stupidest possible ways.
Thanks, Prof. Last year, I'd like to call Prof. Kevin to come in and hand over the gift. A really good talk came from the Vesico group.
I'm going to get something from my boss. Great.
Well, thank you, Marcus, very much. I'm glad to see you have started putting in my one argument against one of your cases, which is getting rid of the water hyacinth. And I keep reminding him, it's a symptom, it's not the problem. So you remove the water hyacinth, the enriched water is still there, and then you get an algae called microcystis that takes over. And that you could also walk on, it gets so dense, and it at times turns toxic, and anything that drinks the water then dies. So you remove one problem, but not the real problem, and another one comes. But nonetheless, that's a small point, and I'm very pleased to see that you're taking it. You are noticing it now. Nonetheless, I think a huge success that we've heard about, and I think that underlines for us the incredibly good science that Marcus does. He is a very, very good scientist, excellent scientist. But on top of that, the reason that he's got the Vice-Chancellor's Award, for instance, is because of how good Marcus is at communicating his science to everyone and being able to unpack it and then pass on to virtually anyone to understand what he's done. And so he's had some great achievements in this area as well. So I don't know if you know that Marcus does not only work on weeds, he also works on dung beetles. And he is the first WITS academic to get onto the TED system, and it's knocking about 340,000 views around the world. People who have looked at a 15-minute talk by Marcus. And that has led on to something even more fascinating. I didn't know that there is a list of the 50 most sexy scientists around the world. Now, I was directed to go and have a look at this, and wow, there are some incredibly beautiful postdocs around the world doing all kinds of things. But at number 39, age unknown, is Professor Marcus Byrne. Congratulations. And thank you very much for a fantastic talk, Marcus.
If you would like a copy of that CD, I'll put a list at the top of each table, these tables here, and then just put your name on it, and then I'll post it to you within the next 12 months.
Thank you very much, Prof. For myself, because I didn't know much about Marcus. I knew him, but not that much. Thank you very much for that. Before we close, I'd like to thank audiovisual for the job well done. I'd like to thank Prof also for the very informative topic that he shared with us today. And I'd like to thank Best Community, Best Staff, Best Students, and even the public, from outside, for keep the final building every time we have a talk, we always know that you will be here. And I'd like to thank CDP, Services, and PMD, and the base of breakfast team for making sure that we have this breakfast. And again, Best Club for the venue and the wonderful food. We thank you for that. Hyacinth Magazines, we thank you for the sponsoring us with the magazines. So that we have a copy over here. It's 2 copies. It's Garden Home, the Garden Home and Country Life. So if you have to get one, there's one on the table at the front. And then lastly, I'd like to thank Prof again, because the moment I saw that, this topic about the weeds, I realized that now let me go and talk to him, and he didn't even hesitate to come and do a talk for us. And thank you very much for this opportunity. The very last one, I'd like to thank Jessica, Maria and Jessica, all the persons being involved on keeping money and everything that we are doing now. Thank you very much for meeting. Robert, thanks, bye.